Section 10 of Highways in Hiding by George O. Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. Shifting my aim slightly, I pulled the trigger. The .375 Bonanza went off with a sound like an atom bomb in a telephone booth, and the slug whiffed between her arm and her body and drilled a crater in the plaster behind her. The roar stunned her stiff. The color drained from her face, and she swayed uncertainly. I found time enough to observe that while her body was as hard as chromium, her nervous system was still human, and sensitive enough to make her faint from a sudden shock. She caught herself and stood there, stiff and white, with one delicate but steel-hard hand up against her throat. Then I dug the household. They were piling out of the hay like a bunch of trained firemen answering a still alarm. They arrived in all stages of nightdress in the following order. The man, about 22 or 3, who skidded into the room on dead gallop and put on brakes with a screech as he caught sight of the .375, with its thin wisp of blue vapor still trailing out of the muzzle. The twins, aged about 14, who might have turned to run if they'd not been frightened stiff at the sight of the cannon in my fist. Father and then Mother Macklin, who came in briskly but without panic. Mr. Macklin said crisply, "May I have an explanation, Mr. Cornell?" "I'm a cornered rat," I said thickly, "and so I'm scared. I want out of here in one piece. I'm so scared that if I'm intercepted, I may get panicky, and if I do, someone is likely to get hurt. Understand?" "Perfectly," said Mr. Macklin calmly. "Are you going to let him get away with this?" snapped the eldest son. "Fred, a nervous man with a revolver is very dangerous, especially one who lacks the rudimentary training in the simpler forms of burglary." I couldn't help but admire the older gentleman's bland self-confidence. "Young man," he said to me, "you've made a bad mistake." "No, I haven't," I snapped. "I've been on the trail of something concrete for a long time, and now that I've found it, I'm not going to let it go easily." I waved the .375, and they all cringed, but Mr. Macklin. He said, "Please put that weapon down, Mr. Cornell. Let's not add attempted murder to your other crimes." "Don't force me to do it, then. Get out of my way and let me go." He smiled. "I don't have to be a telepath to tell you that you won't pull that trigger unless you're sorely driven," he replied calmly. He was so right that it made me mad. He added, "Also, you've got 4 shells left since you carry the firearm on an empty chamber. Not used to guns, are you, Mr. Cornell?" Well, I wasn't used to wearing a gun. Now that he mentioned it, I remembered that it was impossible to fire the shell under the hammer by any means except by pulling the trigger. What he was telling me meant that even if I made a careful but bloody sweep of it with my 4 shells, there would be 2 of them left, and even the twins were more than capable of taking me apart inch by inch once my revolver was empty. "Seems to be an impasse, Mr. Cornell," he said with an amused smile. "You bland-mannered bunch of—" "Ah, now, please," he said abruptly. "My wife is not accustomed to such language, nor is my daughter, although my son and the twins probably know enough definitions to make them angry. This is an impasse, Mr. Cornell, and it behooves all of us to be extremely polite to one another. For one wrong move and you'll fire. This will mean complete chaos for all of us. One wrong word from you, and some one of us will take offense, which will be equally fatal. Now, let's all stand quietly and talk this over." "What's to talk over?" I demanded. "A truce. Or call it an armistice." "Do go on." He looked at his family, and I followed his gaze. Miss Macklin was leaning against the wall with a look of concentrated interest. Her elder brother Fred was standing alert and ready, but not quite poised for a leap. Mrs. Macklin had a motherly-looking smile on her face, which for some unknown reason she was aiming at me in a disarming manner. The twins were standing close together, both of them puzzled-looking. I wondered whether they were Esper or telepath. Twins are always the same when they're identical and opposite when they're fraternal. The thing that really bothered me was their attitude. They all seemed to look at me as though I were a poor, misguided individual who had unwittingly tromped on their toes after having fallen in among bad company. They reminded me of the Harrisons, who looked and sounded so sympathetic when I'd gone out there seeking Catherine. A fine bunch to trust. First they swipe my girl and erase all traces of her. Then when I go looking, they offer me help and sympathy for my distress. The right hand giveth and the left hand taketh away. Yeah. I hated them all. Yet I am not a hero type. I wanted the whole Highways in Hiding rolled up like an old discarded corridor carpet, with every Mekstrom on earth rolled up in it. But even if I'd been filled to the scuppers with self-abnegation in favor of my fellow man, I could not have pulled the trigger and started the shambles. For instead of blowing the whole thing wide open because of a batch of bodies, the survivors would have enough savvy to clean up the mess before our bodies got cold, and the old Highways crowd would be doing business at the same old stand. Without, I might add, without the minor nuisance that people called Steve Cornell. What I really wanted was to find Catherine. And then it came to me that what I really wanted second of all was to possess a body of Mekstrom flesh, to be a physical superman. "Suppose," said Miss Macklin unexpectedly, "that it is impossible." "Impossible?" I roared. "What have you got that I haven't got?" "Mekstrom's disease," replied Miss Macklin quietly. "Fine," I sneered. "So how do I go out and get it?" "You'll get it naturally, or not at all," she said. "Now see here," I started off, but Mr. Macklin stopped me with an upraised hand. "Mr. Cornell," he said, "we are in the very awkward position of trying to convince a man that his preconceived notion is incorrect. We can produce no direct evidence to support our statement. All we can do is to tell you that so far as we know, and as much as we know about Mekstrom's disease, no one has ever contracted the infection artificially." "And how can I believe you?" "That's our awkward position. We cannot show you anything that will support our statement. We can profess the attitudes of honesty, truth, honor, goodwill, altruism, and every other word that means the same thing. We can talk until doomsday, and nothing will be said." "So where is all this getting us?" I asked. "I hope it is beginning to cause your mind to doubt the preconceived notion," he said. "Ask yourself why any outfit such as ours would deliberately show you evidence." "I have it, and it does not make sense." He smiled. "Precisely. It does not." Fred Macklin interrupted. "Look, Dad, why are we bothering with all this guff?" "Because I have hopes that Mr. Cornell can be made to see our point, to join, as it were, our side." "Fat chance," I snapped. "Please. I'm your elder, and not at all inclined to waste my time. You came here seeking information, and you shall have it. You will not believe it, but it will, I hope, fill in some blank spots after you have had a chance to compare, sort, and use your own logic on the problem. As a mechanical engineer, you are familiar with the line of reasoning that we non-engineering people call Occam's razor?" "The law of least reaction," I said automatically. "The what?" asked Mrs. Macklin. Miss Macklin said, "I'll read it from Mr. Cornell's mind, Mother. The law of least reaction can be demonstrated by the following. If a bucket of mixed wood shavings and gasoline are heated, there is a calculable probability that the gasoline will catch fire first because the gasoline is easier, least reaction, to set on fire." "Right," I said, "but how does this apply to me?" Mr. Macklin took up the podium again. "For one thing, your assumption regarding Catherine is correct. At the time of the accident, she was found to have Mekstrom's disease in its earliest form. The Harrisons did take her in to save her life. Now, dropping that side of the long story, we must follow your troubles. The accident, to a certain group of persons, was a fortunate one. It placed under their medical care a man, you, in whose mind could be planted a certain mild curiosity about a peculiar road sign and other evidences. The upshot of this was that you took off on a tour of investigation." That sounded logical, but there were a lot of questions that had open, ragged ends flying loose. Mr. Macklin went on. "Let's diverge for the moment. Mr. Cornell, what is your reaction to Mekstrom's disease at this point?" That was easy. It was a curse to the human race, excepting that some outfit knew how to cure it. Once cured, it made a physical superman of the so-called victim. What stuck in my craw was the number of unfortunate people who caught it and died painfully, or by their own hand in horror, without the sign of aid or assistance. He nodded when I'd gone about halfway through my conclusions and before I got mentally violent about them. "Mr. Cornell, you've expressed your own doom at certain hands. You feel that the human race could benefit by exploitation of Mekstrom's disease?" "It could if everybody helped out and worked together." "Everybody?" he asked with a sly look. I yearned again for the ability of a telepath, and I knew that the reason why I was running around loose was because I was only an esper, and therefore incapable of learning the truth directly. I stood there like a totem pole and tried to think. Eventually it occurred to me. Just as there are people who cannot stand dictatorships, there are others who cannot abide democracy. In any aggregation like the human race, there will be the warped souls who feel superior to the rest of humanity. They welcome dictatorships, providing they can be among the dictators, and if they are not included, they fight until the other dictatorship is deposed so that they can take over. "True," said Mr. Macklin. "And yet, if they declared their intentions, how long would they last?" "Not very long. Not until they had enough power to make it stick," I said. "And above all, not until they have the power to grant this blessing to those whose minds agree with theirs. So now, Mr. Cornell, I'll make a statement that you can accept as a mere collection of words to be used in your arguments with yourself. We'll assume two groups, one working to set up a hierarchy of Mekstroms in which the rest of the human race will become hewers of wood and drawers of water. Contrasting that group is another group, who feels that no man or even a congress of men are capable of picking and choosing the individual who is to be granted the body of the physical superman. We cannot hope to watch the watchers, Mr. Cornell, and we will not have on our conscience the weight of having to select A over B as being more desirable. Enough of this. You'll have to argue it out by yourself later." "Later?" grunted Fred Macklin. "You're not going to—" "I certainly am," said his father firmly. "Mr. Cornell may yet be the agency whereby we succeed in winning out." He spoke to me again. "Neither group dares to come into the open, Mr. Cornell. We cannot accuse the other group of anything nefarious any more than they dare to accuse us. Their mode of attack is to coerce you into exposing us for a group of undercover operators who are making supermen. "Look," I asked him, "why not admit it? You've got nothing sinister in mind. Think of all the millions of people who have not had schooling beyond the preparatory grades," he said. "People of latent psi ability instead of trained practice. Or those poor souls who have no psi ability worth mentioning. Do you know the history of the Rhine Institute, Mr. Cornell?" "Only vaguely." In the early days of Rhine's work at Duke University, there were many scoffers. The scoffers and detractors, naturally enough, were those people who had the least amount of psi ability. Admitting that at the time all psi ability was latent, they still had less of it. But after Rhine's death, his associates managed to prove his theories and eventually worked out a system of training that would develop the psi ability. Then, Mr. Cornell, those who are blessed with a high ability in telepathy or perception, the common term of esper is a misnomer, you know, because there's nothing extrasensory about perception, found themselves being suspected and hated by those who had not this delicate sense. It took 40 or 50 years before common public acceptance got around to looking at telepathy and perception in the same light as they saw a musician with a trained ear or an artist with a trained eye. Psi is a talent that everybody has to some degree, and today this is accepted with very little angry jealousy. But now, he went on thoughtfully, consider what would happen if we made a public announcement that we could cure Mekstrom's disease by making a physical superman out of the poor victim. Our main enemy would then stand up righteously and howl that we are concealing the secret. He would be believed. We would be tracked down and persecuted, eventually wiped out, while he sat behind his position and went on picking and choosing victims whose attitude parallel his own. "And who is this character?" I demanded. I knew, but I wanted him to say it aloud. He shook his head. "I'll not say it," he said, "because I will not accuse him aloud any more than he dares to tell you flatly that we are an underground organization that must be rooted out. He knows about our highways and our way stations and our cure, because he uses the same cure. He can hide behind his position so long as he makes no direct accusation. You know the law, Mr. Cornell." Yes, I knew the law. So long as the accuser came into court with a completely clean mind, he was safe. But Scholar Phelps could hardly make the accusation, nor could he supply the tiniest smidgen of direct evidence to me, for in my accusation I'd implicate him as an accessory accuser, and then he would be called upon to supply not only evidence, but a clear, clean, and open mind. In shorter words, the old stunt of pointing loudly to someone else as a dodge for covering up your own crime was a lost art in this present-day world of telepathic competence. The law, of course, insisted that no man could be convicted for what he was thinking, but only upon direct evidence of action. But a crooked-thinking witness found himself in deep trouble anyway, even though crooked thinking was in itself no crime. "Now, for one more time," said Mr. Macklin. "Consider a medical person who cannot qualify because he is a telepath and not a perceptive. His very soul was devoted to being a scholar of medicine like his father and his grandfather, but his telepath ability does not allow him to be the full scholar. A doctor he can be, but he can never achieve the final training, again the ultimate degree. Such a man overcompensates and becomes the frustrate, a ripe disciple for the Superman theory." "Dr. Thorndyke!" I blurted. His face was as blank, as non-committal as a bronze bust. I could neither detect affirmation nor negation in it. He was playing it flat. I'd never get any evidence from him either. "So now, Mr. Cornell, I have given you food for thought. I've made no direct statements, nothing that you could point to. I've defended myself, as any man will do, but only by protestations of innocence. Therefore I suggest that you take your artillery and vacate the premises. I remembered the Bonanza 375 that was hanging in my hand. Shamefacedly, I slipped it back in my hip pocket. But look, sir, please leave, Mr. Cornell. Any more I cannot say without laying us wide open for trouble. I am sorry for you. It is no joy being a pawn. But I hope that your pawnship will work for our side, and I hope that you will come through it safely. Now, please, leave us quietly." I shrugged. I left. And as I was leaving, Miss Macklin touched my arm and said in a soft voice, "I hope you find your Catherine, Steve, and I hope that some day you'll be able to join her." I nodded dumbly. It was not until I was all the way back to my car that I remembered that her last statement was something similar to wishing me a case of measles so that I'd afterward be immune from them. End of Chapter 10.